In January this year, I was actually contacted by the BBC. It was a program they were making about sustainability, students in particular, and the program evolved around looking at the lifestyles of students and how they use products, fashion, plastic, and all these sorts of things. And I was approached because my area of research was actually microplastics in the coastal environment, and I said, yes, of course. I'll take them to a beach, we'll do some experiments, you can see what's on the beach, and it'll all be good. And then they said, well, that's great, but what about tap water? And I said, what do you mean about tap water? He said, well, is there plastic in tap water? And I said, well, yes, of course there is. How do you know? I said, because I'm sure I've seen some research on tap water. And actually, it's in everything, because there's research papers in literally everything that we can see, which we touch. It's in sea salt. So if you like sea salt, the recommendation was that you use Himalayan mountain salt, which has been around for millions of years and therefore should be clean, except it's got a plastic lid on top of the container. What I always find amazing about this stuff, I don't know if you've ever bought it, but it has a sell-by date. Have you ever seen that? I've never quite worked that one out. It's already been alluded to this morning that it's also in mussels, and when we made the film Plastic Oceans, we got hold of research for that, and we found that in 100% of the mussels in Holland, in Belgium, and in France that were tested, taken from the intertidal zone, 100% contained plastic particles. From my own perspective, finding out that plastic and seeing the research that plastic was actually in beer was quite devastating, as you can probably imagine. But even moving away from beer, it was also in bottled water. Anybody who still drinks bottled water, about 30% of it actually comes from a tap, but that's another issue. But here's a little picture here. You can see this film running, and they've used sort of blue light, and the plastic is fluorescing to show you as it spins around. It's quite scary. In fact, when I look at all the research, and I've done a lot, the only thing that I couldn't find where there was plastic was fine red wine, which also happens to be a favorite tipple, especially this one. I can't afford this, Screaming Eagle, $3,000 a bottle. But this is, if anybody, I'm looking for some altruistic, philanthropic help here to conduct some research, probably over a couple of years, maybe 3, I suspect, to actually find out what the true extent of microplastics is in fine red wine. So please contact me afterwards if you want me to help you with that one. Anyway, getting back to the BBC, what they wanted to know was whether or not there was plastic in the tap water around the UK. So they sent me all of these samples from around, and yes, it's in an HDPE bottle. They sent me all of these samples from about 12 or so different places around the UK. They all used the same method. We developed a method to actually clean out the plastic bottles so that we could actually get it sent to us, and these things arrived at the university. We very hurriedly, because we literally had weeks, came up with a protocol based on other scientific protocols that we'd found to sort of find out how we could filter this and see what was in it. And I'll be honest with you, I wasn't expecting much. I thought it was probably going to be, 10, 20 particles. We used a 34-micron filter to push it, which is far, far finer than anything that happens in the water filtration system around any country, certainly in Europe. And when you think that where I live, it's very low-lying on the south coast, and if there's a flood hazard, the water treatment plants, the sewage plants, have an option to let everything go into the sea, but they do have a filter. That filter has a 6-millimeter hole on it, which is quite concerning. So we came up with this protocol, and what we used was a stain. So we stained what was left of the water so that it ended up with these particles, hopefully, left on this very fine polycarbonate filter. Contamination was the biggest issue, and we went through every single thing we could to stop the contamination by covering it with foil. We didn't have access to the right cupboard to do it, and this was really, it wasn't designed to be a proper experiment, although it was as good as we could possibly do. But contamination was a major issue. And these are the sorts of things that we were seeing. So once we stained the plastic, you could see them under a blue light. Now, is it conclusive that this is plastic? Well, no, because what the stain does is it shows up non-organic material. It also shows up calcium carbonate. So if we live in a hard water area like I do, that water would probably show up those particles. But if you look at it, this is the sort of thing that we were getting. What we also did with the samples is we put them under an FTIR scanner. And what that does is it sort of bounces infrared into the particles, they resonate, it comes back up, and it maps it against what is already known as a product. And so if you look here, this is one of them, this is cellulose, and you can see on the screen that you've got, that's what it should look like on the top, and that's what it looks like on the bottom. So it's a pretty close match. We could say, yes, it's cellulose. But we actually moved that piece of cellulose, and this was quite interesting, to another part of it. It was only about 40 microns across. And we got this. And you probably can't read it, but that's opium powder. So that piece of cellophane, if you wanted to hypothesize on how that got there, this is somebody's drug wrap, which has been thrown in the loo, which has gone through the system, and then comes back and has opium powder on it. Now, I foolishly put that on my Facebook page, which I thought would be in it, because I thought it was kind of interesting, pretty cool. One of my friends who just thought it was really amusing just sent another message saying, David, I've just actually drunk 200 liters of water. There's no impact yet. When am I going to start feeling the effects of the opium? And this is what it looks like. So there's I'll let you see the results.
We head to David's lab. We wanted to see if there was any plastic in our tap water, so we tested samples from across the UK, including one from the student's house.
All right, well, let's take that sample and let's do something with it, shall we?
Yeah, sounds good.
The tests were carried out at the University of Portsmouth. We only tested a very small number of samples, meaning the results aren't conclusive. In our samples, we found between 118 and 203 microparticles suspected of being plastic. This was made up of microscopic pieces and fibers. To put this into context, pure water, which has no contamination, has roughly 60 microparticles in it, meaning our lowest reading was virtually double that of the uncontaminated water. In one sample, the plastic was identified as cling film, and in another as nylon.
I would have never thought that, me drinking a glass of water was going to end up with plastic going through my body.
We don't know the impact these microparticles have on our health yet, but it's worrying enough that the World Health Organization is currently reviewing the effects of microplastics on humans.
So, and what was interesting is then they wanted to interview me, and the whole emphasis here was, this is really bad. We've got to tell the whole world, and I'll come on to this in a second. But when I started this talk, I said, should we be concerned, should we be worried? And at the EGU conference in Austria earlier on in the year, I was approached by journalists to talk on, or to comment on two papers, one of which was that microplastics had been found on glaciers in the middle of nowhere, the other one that they'd been found on mountains in the Pyrenees in the middle of nowhere. And in both of those, when I responded to both of those, my reply was very simple. No, we should not be surprised, but we should be concerned, but not concerned so much about what we know, but about what we don't know. And I think that's really what's being emphasized as we go through today. And really to bring it around, and it's already been mentioned, the World Health Organization produced this paper. And actually, I think the media did it a disservice, because it doesn't say it's okay to drink water. It actually says we don't know enough to know if it's okay. But that wouldn't sell the newspapers. And I think that's the problem. I want to leave you with this one, and mainly because I'm going to be speaking on what I was supposed to be speaking about in the influencers session this afternoon about people. But this is a really interesting quote, because there is a lot of science going on. We still need more, but there's a lot going on. But it will be for nothing if we don't bring people along with us, if we don't bring the media along with us to actually do the right thing, to tell the truth, not look for the sensationalism, not look for the excuses. Thank you very much.